Hello and welcome to the last section, section 6 of chapter 35, the American pageant. And we're looking at American World War II, and also a big chapter. World War II is pretty important. We're looking at Japan dies hard through the Allies' triumph. So let's get right into it. In the Pacific region, the United States was using island hoppings, moving closer and closer towards Japan, taking Guam, taking Wake Island, Saipan, some of the other places. The Japanese fleet, most of it was destroyed at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which is the largest naval battle in the history of mankind. Most boats, most ships, most planes taking place in this battle, October 1944. It's at this point that MacArthur triumphantly returned to the Philippines, and he came ashore, and they did multiple takes of this to make sure it looked just right because he's kind of a ninny. Japan tried to invade India in 1944 at this point, trying to draw forces from the push to take towards Tokyo. It didn't work. And then in March 1945, the United States seized Iwo Jima. And this battle was vicious. It's just this like rock in the middle of the Pacific. In this battle, 6,800 Americans were killed, 19,000 wounded. But the true picture of how the fighting was vicious, especially with the caves and the tunnels and the booby traps, the Japanese had 18,000 dead, but only 216 surrendered. Remember, the Japanese had this fighting spirit that it was more honorable to kill yourself, to commit suicide, than to surrender to the enemy. And so there's two really, really good movies about this, directed by Clint Eastwood. If you get a chance, check out Flags of Our Fathers, which is the American tale of it, and then Letters from Iwo Jima, which is the Japanese side of it. And it's very powerful, very good movie. This is the famous picture of the men raising the flag atop Mount Suribachi in Iwo Jima. The flag had blown over a couple times, and they went up and put the flag back up. The photographer didn't like the picture. He thought it was bad because you couldn't see their faces, but it came this inspirational, almost propaganda photograph that this was the Americans working together to plant freedom across the world. Most of these men were brought home from the front and taken on tours of the country to sell Liberty bonds and and war bonds and things like that. From there, they take Okinawa. This is an 82-day battle. It is the bloodiest of the Pacific War. This is actually home territory of Japan. It's an island off the mainland portion, or the big islands of Japan. This was not something that the Japanese acquired in their invasions, and so it was a vicious, vicious fight. In it, 12,500 Americans were killed, 38,900 wounded. It's substantial in how hard it was to take this island. The Japanese had 110,000 killed in Okinawa. And so this was just a small island off the coast. And so the prospects of invading Japan itself, Japan proper, was daunting. They were planning for the war going for another year, maybe 2 years. And we're talking high casualty rates for both sides. In this battle, 42,000 to 150,000 civilians were killed in Okinawa. Both were tremendously difficult to take over, which influences how the war ends. That and the Japanese starting to use kamikaze planes. They simply won't surrender. And they started using kamikaze planes, where they load up planes with explosives and have their men literally fly into the sides of ships and to explode and sink the boats. And so the poor men and the servicemen on these ships had to try to shoot these planes down before they crash into their boat. Kamikaze in Japanese means divine wind, by the way. So the Americans are preparing for an invasion of Japan. So Operation Downfall was being planned. It's the largest amphibious invasion ever. It makes D-Day look, kind of like chump work. Not really, but it's, much smaller. It was due to start November 1st, 1945. There would then be a second landing near Tokyo on March 1st, 1946. Japan had never surrendered its own country in its 2,600-year history. Add to that the vicious combat, their never surrender attitude, the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Bataan Death March. Not a single Japanese military division surrendered during the war. And so this is just their mentality of it. And it's estimated that there's going to be 1 million additional American casualties, which that means double or triple that for the Japanese. We're talking 2 to 3 million Japanese killed, wounded, and missing in action. One little story that shows the dedication of the Japanese is Hiro Onada. He didn't surrender until 1974. almost a full 30 years after the war. He had a remote island in the Pacific. He refused to surrender. He manned his post for 29 years. And it finally took his commanding officer to show up and say, hey, look, this is real. The war's been over, because he didn't believe it. He thought it was fake. Or you could, face this invasion, or possibly use experimental, highly destructive and controversial weapons. This is the planned invasions. You have Operation Olympic, Operation Coronet, to invade the mainland of Japan. And these are the relative strength that they're talking about. It's just remarkable. This was planned all the way into 46. So the atomic bomb. In 1939, Albert Einstein did not author, but he signed his name on a letter to FDR warning him that the Nazis were trying to develop a bomb, an atomic bomb using nuclear fission, splitting the atom, that could basically, one bomb placed in a boat could blow up an entire city. There's actually 3 scientists, mainly from Czechoslovakia, who wrote this. They're called Men from Mars because they're so smart. And one of them is Edward Teller. And they get Einstein to sign it to legitimize it. So it's actually written by Leo Szilard, Edward Teller, and Eugene Wigner. Germany was gobbling up uranium from Czechoslovakia to enrich to make this atomic weapon. British scientists proved that an explosion was possible with just several kilos of plutonium instead of massive amounts of it. And so it proved that you could do this on a much smaller scale. FDR immediately started the Manhattan Project, which is the most top secret and expensive project in the history of the United States. They had a $2 billion appropriation. This isn't their money, not ours. 600,000 workers contributed to this. Most of them didn't know what they were doing. They were just working for the government, doing a job, and basically the whole country worked together to enrich enough uranium, to create plutonium, to do all the crazy scientific stuff that it was to do this. The Japanese had 170 grams of enriched uranium in 1944. They were trying to do the same thing. The Nazis shared their secrets. That is not enough to build an atomic bomb. The United States was producing it by the ton. They have a few grams. We have tons of it. FDR didn't want to share the secrets with the Soviets. Maybe he saw some, future things, some foreshadowing down the road. But he did share his secrets with the British. And so everywhere on this map is a dot. There was something going on that contributed to the atomic bomb, to the Manhattan Project, including Yerevan here in Colorado, and then most of it's down here at Los Alamos, and then Project Trinity at Alamogordo. And so the first atomic bomb was exploded in New Mexico in July 1945. By that point, President Roosevelt had passed away. Vice President Truman, this was so top secret, he didn't know about it until he took over. While in Germany, at the Potsdam, a suburb of Berlin, he issued the Potsdam Declaration, which warned Japan to suffer or face prompt and utter destruction. They didn't do that. They had, like I said, 2 D-Day type invasions planned for Japan. Operation Olympic, they needed 10 divisions. Operation Coronet, which was April 1946. The Japanese had 2 million men at home, 5,000 kamikaze planes ready to defend their nation. So Truman never blinked an eye. He didn't hesitate. This wasn't a big decision. He knew exactly what to do. On August 6, 1945, aboard the Enola Gay, the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. That bomb killed 70,000. Some estimates range up to 126,000 people. Japan thought it was the only bomb the U.S. had, and so they didn't surrender. Many people kind of understand maybe that first bomb, but a lot of critics say, why the second one? The second one was dropped on Nagasaki on August 9th, killed 39,000 to 80,000 people. Many died, sadly, later of radiation and sickness. And the United States unleashed onto the world the most awesome and terrible weapon ever constructed. The U.S. had a third bomb ready to go for September 1st, but by then the Japanese surrendered. At that point, in paling, not trying to, to make light of the situation or not make it as a big a deal, but 250,000 to 400,000 civilians per month were dying in Asia at this time from other bombings and other attacks. And so compared to the death and destruction, it's not as bad as what was going on. 800,000 Asians and Japanese primarily were killed from the U.S.'s fire bombings. But because these weapons were so destructive and so thorough, really caught the attention of the world. This is what Hiroshima looked like afterwards. This is the actual orders from the Hoover Institute for the dropping of the atomic bomb, commanded by Paul Tibbets. Day of the mission, you can see all this stuff here. They have the weather, they have all that going on, and then where's it at? Bombs special. That's how they label it, as special. There's a video on the day that changed the world. It's really good. This is what it looked like in Hiroshima then. This is Nagasaki on the right. Another images of it. This shadow was burned into the wall. You have reverse shadows here from the severe blast and heat that went on. This person was incinerated. The shadow was burned into the wall, and this used to be a person, and they were vaporized. This poor woman, the pattern on her kimono was seared into her skin. This is what it looks like in Hiroshima today. It's actually a thriving city. The radiation is largely gone. This dome where the atomic bombs don't actually hit the ground and explode, they explode above the ground. This dome survived and became kind of a symbol of their resilience and their comeback. It's one of the major manufacturing cities in Japan today. Because of it, the Japanese finally acquiesced and surrendered on August 15th, 1945, which became known as VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day. The formal surrender was signed aboard the USS Missouri on September 2nd. Japanese and Nazis were tried for war crimes, most of them executed for what they did. The total cost of the war, estimates are 40 to 72. I've seen as high as 80 million people killed globally. Over half were civilians, people that weren't involved. They didn't have guns. They weren't fighting. They were just trying to live their lives. The U.S. officially lost 405,399 killed, 800,000 wounded. The Soviets alone lost 20 million people. That's 10 million civilians. That's 10 million combatants. And then you also have another 6 million on top of that died of starvation and exposure to the elements. So in all, they have 27 million killed. Europe and Asia are in absolute ruins. It costs billions of dollars. It changes the world forever. And in its wake, Europe is no longer powerful. Europe can no longer dominate the globe. It's the end of imperialism. It's the end of colonies. There's two superpowers that are left standing. They're so powerful. They're just so much more stronger than the rest of the world that they're superpowers. And though they were allies against the Nazis, they don't really like each other and trust each other. And they're going to have a competition to divide up the globe. That's the USA and the USSR, which is a little segue into our next unit, the Cold War. Europe was too weak at that point to really kind of stand up to either nation. This is a colorized version of the photograph you see here. This is the formal surrender aboard the USS Missouri, which you can tour in Pearl Harbor now. Just some video if you want to look up. Really cool celebrations. I mean, kind of remarkable. To celebrate the end of the war in Europe, in Moscow, they actually ran out of alcohol. They drank all the booze, all of it, gone. And so here's the end of the VJ Day, the end of the war in the Pacific. It was a stunning turn of event. People were really ready for 2 more years of war, and then suddenly it's over. And then this chart shows you the number of deaths and destruction that's going on. It's so tragic and awful and pretty bad that's going on. So hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, let me know. Hope you learned a little bit about World War II.